What's up, guys? Thanks for stopping by. I know this is sort of an out of nowhere one, but I felt like I sort of had to say something here about some of the news that just came out around this reseller agreement from Palantir and sort of what's happening. And I wanted to just touch on it a little bit, talk about my experiences working with, in, and around resellers, typically how reseller agreements work, what the challenges are, what the good things are. But more than anything, as you can probably tell by the title, largely this is sort of a nothing burger type of play, right? And that's, I think, that's probably the biggest concern I have in general is, are we maybe getting a little bit too much news on a constant and regular basis here? That's what worries me. So in a nutshell, here's the news. Palantir announced they signed a partnership with Carahsoft. Carahsoft is a reseller and an implementer of software. I'll explain what that means and how I've worked with folks like this in the past as well. But as always, just to be clear, I do hold long positions of Palantir. I do like Palantir a lot. I intend to continue to hold this position. And this isn't to make this about being bad news, but more just to give you some perspective on the fact that we got to start to figure out what is really value add versus just noise. And I think it's important as investors to understand the difference between these two things. So let me jump in first and foremost. In the software business, the world of SaaS, of on-prem software, anyone who has to buy technology and then install it, there is this massive ecosystem of consultants, strategic implementers, service integrators. These are people who have technical expertise, typically in installing and building the software, integrating it into their systems, connecting endpoints, connecting data sources, bringing the products together. If you really think about it in the right way, these are like the contractors of the IT world. They take all the different pieces, and when they leave, the hope is you've got a brand new house sitting there, the lights are working, the plumbing works, everything's good to go. And for the most part, this has been the model forever, right? You buy from a major software vendor, you have it installed either by their, what they call professional services in-house, or you outsource it to a vendor who does the consulting work and the implementation work. Now, reselling software is something that's been around for a while as well. Typically, the same folks who do the installations and the implementations are also the same folks that will oftentimes do the reselling. And the way this will work is, and it's an ingenious plan, but I want to call out why I'm concerned about Palantir here in particular. So this isn't a bear case, but this is maybe one of those things that has the appearance of something it's not. I want to be clear on that. So a reseller will typically take a pretty good sized chunk of a deal in terms of payment for doing the deal. So the idea behind this in theory would be like, hey, if you're going to pay a sales rep anyways, why not pay the reseller? They get a nice big piece of the deal. I've seen it range anywhere from 5 or 10% to some vendors who pay up to 50%, because truly getting that customer acquisition is a hugely valuable piece. That's why people are willing to pay it. That's why software vendors are willing to pay so much for good partners. It's really helping them in theory to expand their sales force, ensure that they're in more conversations, make sure they're not missing out on key moments to be involved in planning, in buying and purchasing, in front of procurement, IT, etc. So that's the thing, right? In theory, bringing in partners works great. A lot of companies use it. If you think about your standard BI players out there, they all use resellers. The Oracles of the world, the IBMs of the world, massive reseller programs. The problem, and this is the problem, is Palantir's entire pitch, and the reason why so many of us are bullish on it is because it is a very complete and complex, hey D, what's up? And a very complete and complex product that integrates at a deep level, leveraging autonomous insights, autonomous connectivity to data. They're leveraging things like Foundry, Gotham, and Apollo, right? There's a lot of complex pieces to this. And what I think we've seen is they've been challenged a bit with hiring. Now, I think that part of the problem is there are only so many folks who work in the tech world who have the skill set to go out and position AI, machine learning, deep learning, the ability to really aggregate and understand data sources at scale, position this to the right parties. There's also compensation factors that it's a very, very competitive market, and to get highly skilled account executives in this space is going to be tough, period, full stop. So a lot of folks, I think, are looking at this as like, wow, basically by doing this partnership, they essentially blew up their entire sales team overnight. Well, pump the brakes. It's not that easy. This will be just one of the many, many programs that a Carahsoft or anyone else for that matter would be able to resell. The idea behind it is it's an incentive for the reseller to not only try to get more consulting engagements or jobs with Palantir, for example, as a product, but then to also sell into them after the fact, like, hey, I happen to hear you needed 10 more licenses. Let me get that stood up for you, right? I know it's not that simple, but just give you an idea. There's also typically an expectation that there'll be some co-marketing, right? This doesn't always happen with all third-party resellers or vendors, but co-marketing is where the IT company might partner with their reseller. They'll put their money together, host shows, put on webinars, try to get customers to come out and see the value of the product. In the end of the day, it feels like both are going to win. It's going to be a really good thing. The reason I'm calling this a nothing burger is we don't know the skill set of the people who are reselling this, how deep they're going to go, and what incentive they're going to have to even sell it. Because if it takes them 6 months to 12 months to position a pilot or a POC, and then they have to run that for quite a bit of time to make sure it actually works, that's a lot of effort to not be getting paid, right? Because remember, if you're being paid on commission, you want to get paid as soon as possible, as big of a deal as possible in general, right? Your goal, of course, is to solve the customer's needs. But if you've got 15 products and all 15 in theory might cover some of it, there might be other products to be positioned that will be a little bit easier, a little bit quicker stand-up time, a little bit more cash in the pocket if you're in sales. Now, I have worked with resellers for the better part of probably 15 years now, and I can assure you the same issue that a Palantir or anyone else is having hiring account executives, it's not like suddenly a reseller just has it easier. They have the exact same problem. They have to go out and find qualified, skilled people who can come in and position that product, but not just that product, a lot of other products with it. Now, the hope is they'll partner up here a lot, bring in some specialists from the Palantir side. They'll get the reseller credit with some support from the Palantir reps in general. So maybe that's one way to think about this from a business development perspective, or even what we call sales development as well. So there could be some good things there. But there's also some concerns for me around, I think we're so early here with Palantir, and this is, I think, why I'm so bullish on this in general, is we're so early that we don't even know where we're going to go just yet. So what I hate to see is moving to a reseller too early in the process and not maximizing the value of the product you're positioning, or making sure that the maximization of that value is both understood and positioned correctly. If you're a rep who works for Palantir, you're trained by them, you have a manager who knows the program, that second line manager knows how to distribute and push that knowledge down, in theory, of course, but it's true. This is how it works. This isn't always the same way. I'm going to put this up on the screen from Steven, because I think this is a great, really, really great point here. So if Palantir sales or their partners who resell do a poor job, how much does this affect the image of Palantir? Could this do more harm than good? So that's a great question for so many reasons. I'm actually going to leave that up. I didn't mean to take it down so fast. So you have to think of it like this: in competitive sales, because typically, I'm going to tell you guys straight up here, it's very rare that they're going up against no one, right? Number one, the budgets have to be huge and in place. They have to leverage things like POCs and pilots to do basically try then buy. There's also typically other folks in there trying to sell against them as well. So if they don't do a good job in closing the deal or delivering on what they promised in a pilot or POC, it isn't like a reset button, we try again. That most likely means someone else will have come in and won the deal, the money's used for a different project, etc. Right? So the issue here as well is an unskilled account executive who's positioning a complex product. If it's not positioned correctly from the get-go with the right value proposition, as well as the business use cases tied to it, and then aggregate pilots are not run correctly over time, I think there's a really, I think there's definitely some concerns. I'm going to share another comment here. And Jarek, I'll just tell you, for 20 years I've been doing this, so it's not speculation. I've worked with hundreds of resellers. But the question was, do you know any specifics about Palantir deal, or is it just speculation about the reseller? If so, the input is just noise. So per their release, they have partnered as a resell partner. You can go to Carasoft right now and sign up to be a partner on the bottom of their website. When I oversaw partner programs as part of analytics at IBM, we had something like 900 or 1,000 reselling partners. There were good ones and bad ones. It's not noise. This is the reality of the reselling world. If Palantir can't find the talent they need to fill the open sales jobs, how is a reseller finding talent that's going to be even more deep and integrated into what Palantir is trying to position? So I welcome you to think it's just noise. If you think it is, totally cool. Certainly no offense to me, but I can tell you firsthand, trying to find and fill these roles is very tough, and you don't get more than one swing at the plate oftentimes, because they're going to spend that money to solve the problem they have today. And if they're looking at spending in the several millions of dollars to solve for a problem, it's typically going to be tied to something very big, like digital transformation, digital change, digitization of processes, or we typically see things like a bridge to cloud that hasn't gone well, a transferring of an on-prem to a SaaS model where we need to help with aggregating data from multiple sources. So I think it's a really good question and also a really fair question. And I would actually argue to anyone who's watching this too. I think what Jarek really calls out here, and it should be listened to, is just do your due diligence on this. But I would urge you all to Google the problem with resellers or why reselling doesn't work, because it's going to eat into the margins at scale. And we don't know how long or to what degree it's going to take to get that margin back on those deals, right? And you don't always have direct confirmation with customers as to whether those deals are going well. The feedback isn't always immediate. And a lot of times these conversations can happen without someone from the core vendor being there. In this case, it's Palantir, but it happens to lots of vendors where I might have a partner in a deal that I'm working, and they're having conversations without me, as expected. But I don't know, are those conversations always good? Are they not good? And this is where there's a lot of trust as well. So I think probably the point to take from this is a new relationship. It's a new model for these folks, but this is a very complex product. I think it's great that they have new distribution. I just think that we can't get too overly excited about the idea of what this distribution will mean or what it will do ultimately for them long term in terms of sales or revenue or support or keeping that customer on board. What I will say, however, is, hey, Josh, good to see you too. Thank you. What I will say is this. These are good things in the aggregate. My only point I want to take away is, and this is why, Jarek, I appreciate your comment, by the way, again. I'm not saying it's good, bad, or ugly, and I don't know. I do know this space really well, but I don't know in the exact specifics of a behind-the-scenes contract, although my gut is it's probably extremely generic because they pretty much always are, and they have typically tiers depending on how much they sell, will depend on how much margin they get, level of support, etc. There'll also be associated people on the Palantir side. If you don't know who those are yet, they're likely to hit LinkedIn soon if they're not already there. Those will be partner and channel management teams, so you'll probably see a VP of channels or partnerships. You'll see associated partner reps. Those reps are who provide the training, the enablement, the ongoing support, the pricing support, the quoting support, etc., for the channel partners who do the reselling. Now, not everyone's identical, to be clear. So everyone has maybe a slightly different process, but that is a pretty standard go-to-market. And to be clear, too, some software companies allow reselling. Some software companies do not allow reselling. It has a lot to do with the product, the complexity, how close you want to keep your customer to yourself. Great question from D here. So do channel partners get a continuous cut of the contract or a one-time? So separate this into two sort of demarcated answers for a second, okay? So they're going to get 100% of any of the implementation, the install, the integration work, okay? So that's theirs 100%. This is like the value add. This is like if you're delivering milk to the store, because Hood Milk delivers a truckload of milk to the grocery store. When they get there and they say like, oh shoot, you know what? We actually need 20 more bottles. You can buy them right off the truck, type of thing. They're getting the delivery no matter what. The piece on the one-time cut, they'll get, typically speaking, and I don't know for sure because I haven't read the contract. So to be clear, typically speaking, they'll get that first cut of the first deal just like a sales rep would get it. If they sell additional or upsell that later on, they'll typically get a piece of that as well. But usually reselling is on core vendor paper. That means it's on their own contract. They're not going to pay out on the renewal. I haven't seen anything about that yet. So full transparency, I can't answer if they'll get paid on renewals or not. They may. But the one thing to consider, though, I did another video on net revenue retention and customer acquisition costs. The reason why those metrics are so important for SaaS companies, because they know they're going to spend a lot to get a customer. And then once they get them in, they want to service them really well and maximize those large margins in the SaaS business. If you have to continuously commission out that revenue, that's going to start to eat into margins as well. And I'd also call out too, a lot of companies the size of Palantir do this and a lot don't. So it's really dependent on the technology and the go-to-market around it. These are really great questions. I want to share a few more here. EEJKM, I'm not going to try to say it. Is going the seller route unavoidable? It is completely avoidable. Salesforce 100% doesn't do any reselling, does not even allow it within the company. They're one of the biggest companies on the entire planet Earth. They do zero reselling, and their results have shown that that's a great model to go with. But again, the issue for a Palantir is they need to be in those conversations because of the complexity of their product and what it solves. So it does make sense for them to have a reseller so that if they're positioning like just as an example, a data warehouse or a data lake. And maybe they understand from the conversation they also need a visualization and data modeling, and they want to deliver insights at scale. This is where a reseller who's also an implementer can hear all those things and say, wait a minute, we got to talk about the right solution. This might be Palantir in the middle. So it's I don't want you to think about this as like it's good or it's bad, avoidable or not avoidable, just really complexity and who's going to be able to position it and sell it and what you're paying to get that distribution, okay? I'm going to keep sharing here because these are amazing, amazing questions here. The product is as good as they say. Why do they need some reseller whose market cap is less than Palantir? I guess the product ahead of its time. And I sort of think I answered this a second ago. It's more about having access. If the person who's actually, connecting the sources, doing the work, putting the hands on the keyboard, sticking the wires in the servers, they're hearing everything, they're seeing everything. They're a trusted advisor. And that trusted advisor is typically the person who can say like, well, geez, you know what? You should think about Palantir. Now, one really, really, really big thing to think about here is if all of your competitors are doing a resale model and you're not, those implementation partners may not be as willing to bring you up as a solution if they're not going to also get paid for the integration implementation. So that's one reason why sometimes you want to have that resell in place. I will just be curious to see in a year or two what we generate, what we hear about that they're generating for sales, what kind of return they got, how the channel is growing. I don't think it's a bad thing at all, but I do think it's a complex product, and I just want to make sure that they have a complete understanding of what's going on as well. Their competition is banking on the product. It's 100% true. Great call out there. Yeah, D, no problem. Let me just put another one up here from D2. Would Palantir ever partner in any way with the Salesforce SAP? Would that ever make sense, or the integrations? So let's take a humongous pause here for a second. Partnerships are extremely common. You all could start a website tomorrow and partner with 45 different vendors by the end of the day by sending them an email. Maybe you get a 5% coupon. Maybe you get to have like 3% access or whatever. So the term partnership can be really weird. So take Salesforce, SAP, Oracle, IBM, HP, whatever. 100% they could partner with them. It just depends what that means. And typically when we think about partnering, it could just be as simple as like, Steve, I see the question, I'll answer it in a second. In terms of like what partnering means, if you run an open API network system, which a lot of these folks allow or do, partner could just mean like, hey, we have the certifications, or we've shown the ability to work with your product in a smooth way, and we share that partnership. I don't overread into partnerships unless it's a strategic known reason why. Now, that said, yeah, I think you for sure probably will see these kind of integrations, whether it's a true partnership or just like an open API type of integration. I don't think it matters that much. I think that customers are going to use a couple of the major players for a majority of what their IT teams and sales and service teams need. And then we bring in these sort of specialized tools and solutions like a Palantir. We just want to know, like, look, can you easily integrate? Yes or no? Is there a benefit to doing it this way? Yes or no? And how do I do it? Yes or no? So think of a partnership more as like building the ecosystem, but not 100% like one-to-one value add, just to call that out. It's a good question though. Yeah, you got it. So here's another great one, man. This is real. I really appreciate the questions. And as you guys can probably tell, I work full time in data analytics, machine learning, data science. This is what I do for a living. I work on the consulting and sales side. So I'm both recommending, working with consulting, talking through implementations, etc. So like, I don't just like read an article and then try to spit it back to try to get somebody to like ask me a funny question. Like I literally for a long time, long before I had all this gray and white in my beard, I've been in this space and I've been behind the scenes of this space. So this is all really, really common stuff that I've seen in my years. It's just interesting to see. I'm going to put that up on the screen. I'm going to talk about IL6, but I'm going to share this too. You definitely don't need a library sometimes. I'll admit that. Yeah, that's solid, man. So on this IL6 thing, let me see if I can actually share my screen here. Let me see where my dang button is. Hold on. There's something that I want to put on my screen to show you exactly what this question means, because I think it's really, really important to explain not just what IL6 is, but why this is such a big deal. You definitely got to get your library card, Drew. Okay, sorry. Sorry, team, I'm taking this a little bit live here, but I think this is worthy of someone who doesn't know what this means to show you what it does actually mean. Let me see here. IL6. Okay, hold on one second. I'm just trying to find on their site where they list that diagram. It might be under Apollo, so I'm not sure. Let me see if I can find it real quick here, though. If not, I'll explain in a second. I just thought it might be easier to actually talk through it versus just, let me see. Oh, perfect, got it. Okay, cool. Let me share my screen, team. Sorry about that also. Okay, let me share my screen. Bum, bum, bum. Okay. I'm hoping you all can see my screen here. Oops, helps when I share it. I'm just going to assume everyone can see this. So this is sort of from their site, what they're basically saying they're working on. So uncompromising security, our SaaS is one of 5 offerings authorized for mission critical national security systems, which is IL5, by the US Department of Defense. And we're not stopping there with sort of their big pitch. So when you look here from a level of like security access and clearance, I guess is the easiest way to think about it, right? We've got things like FedRAMP moderate, right? We've got some data integration, data lakes, and data warehouses. We go up a layer to IL level 4. This is like your true sort of SaaS offerings, right? SAP, Salesforce, and Oracle. Palantir is able to accommodate what they call DoD, CUI, and NSS. This is almost as high as you can possibly get from a data perspective, managing, monitoring, aggregating, delivering, right? IL6, as it's measured today, is typically considered like the highest possible level of security clearance you can get for a product. And to be at an IL level 6 for a SaaS product, so I want to call that out, you need to accommodate what's called DoD classified information. Now, I think this is an important call out because when you think about what this means is there are very few people who can do this, because it's not just now a question of saying, I'm trying to think how I want to phrase this in the way that's not going to be unbelievably complex, because I don't want to do that to everybody watching. It's not enough to just say like, hey, it's secure, we can handle classified information. It is so much more than that. When you think about in terms of like an IL6 level clearance, it means that there is no possible way that something could be compromised. It has to be completely secure. Typically, these are stored on their own tenanted servers in the cloud. And what that will often mean is, quick lesson on back-end IT here. Think of an apartment building a lot like a server. You might have lots of apartments in an apartment building. Those are the tenants, right? So a server could have lots of tenants. They're completely separated. So in theory, they're totally safe. But keep in mind, things can happen. With extreme levels of security, granularity into that, you want to have single tenant access, completely protected, no in, no out, that type of a play. I did see the news today that they were working on at least getting to IL6 or have the capabilities to do so. So I'm going to give you an example of a way to think about this in an easier way. One of the things that was really big back around 2014, 2015 was this idea of HIPAA. HIPAA was about protecting medical information, making sure it wasn't being shared, et cetera. A lot of vendors were basically saying like, our products are HIPAA certified or HIPAA ready, but you are also responsible as the medical provider to ensure your data is protected. You're protecting your servers. You're protecting access to that data. So there's a lot of combinations between how these things will integrate and work with each other. I saw that there was news that they were getting prepared for IL6. And by the way, sorry for such a big explanation for this, but I just want to make sure everyone understands this is a big deal. If they get IL6, this means they can now start to work with much deeper level stuff than they currently are working with today. And for what we know, maybe they already are. I don't know. But getting that sort of approval of certification or whatever they have to do, I think is going to be a pretty big deal. So I'd call that out. And yeah, you definitely don't need a library when you have a Sean, that's for sure. I want to share this as well. The thing I'm most excited about in government, I think we have the opportunity to be the first software prime. Wow, that's really exciting. And I love the comment on TAM. I want to address TAM for a second. And I also want to call out SAM, because I think SAM's even more important. So first of all, if you don't know what TAM is the total addressable market. So when anyone starts a company, regardless of what it is, you look out the universe of all the people, companies, businesses, governments that could potentially be your customer. That's your total addressable market that your solution or product can work in. Within the TAM is what we call an SAM, or a serviceable addressable market. This is sort of putting the arms of reality around what you think and saying to yourself, within the total addressable market, where can we really win business? Where should we really target and spend our time? And I think that by becoming what is stated here as a prime is the leader. That is the key product, solution, whatever, that everything else is built off of. That's a big, big move, because it puts you in a position where now everyone else has to start to work with you instead of you having to work with everything else. Now, I do not work on IL6. I never have. I certainly don't even want to. So I don't want to pretend to be an expert there. I just want to give at least enough to feel dangerous that you know what I'm talking about. So I'd leave it at that. So just D, I'm going to call it out, like, that is literally top secret, 100% confidential, like government level stuff. We don't fool around with that kind of stuff, right? I'm just reading the comments here. There's a lot coming in faster than I can. So Drew, this is a great question. So, and I can speak to this directly too. So I'm wondering how their training is for the new sales employees if they have to get a third party to help sell the product. It's not about necessarily an ability to sell it. You have to think of it like this. They're not that big. They don't have 50,000 salespeople out in the field, or 20,000 or 10,000. So this means the only conversations their salespeople are having are the ones they're directly involved in. They're in the room having the conversation. The idea behind a reseller, whether you think it's good, bad, or totally indifferent, they've got more, excuse me, more ears in more rooms who are doing the work, hands on keyboard, hearing what's going on. Now, that said, they could just as easily tell them to buy a totally different vendor, a totally different solution. So what Palantir will do is have an entire dedicated team internally. And again, I don't know who those people are. This is the way it will typically work with basically everybody. They will have an entire dedicated team whose job will be to enable their partners and their resellers on the tech, how to sell it, how to position it, how to phrase it, build it, etc. You have to really think about a reseller. If you want it to work, this is the reason I called it a nothing burger. It's a nothing burger until we understand what they're doing. That's huge. You have to understand what they're going to work on, how they're going to work together, and all that great stuff. But this is a big piece. They have to take responsibility to properly enable those resellers on what to listen for, how to position, and how to potentially win. And that's going to be usually bringing in some experienced people from the Palantir side to help them out, by the way. And I want to be clear, this is not just Palantir. This is everybody. Everybody out there who wants to do a reseller has to use this motion. Otherwise, you're never going to win any deals. You signed up for nothing. You have to enable them to be successful. So really appreciate these questions. I see a lot of folks jumping in. I appreciate that. Amit, IL6, of course. Listen, I can't tell you what they teach at the library. That's actually IL8. That's extremely secret. That's like beyond top secret. That's almost like bottom secret. I see Kris in the chat. Good seeing you, man. God, there's some good stuff on the side here. Yeah, Kris, let me send Kris you over a quick invite here. I'd love to have you jump on. Let me do it real quick here, because I'd love to get your take on this, especially because I was talking about some of the old HIPAA rules here that I think apply. Let me shoot something over to you right now. Okay, Kris, you should be seeing that in just a second. Yeah, so I'd love to get your take on this as well. So again, I think this is why I don't want anyone to read this or watch it later and say, like, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, he doesn't understand the resellers or how these relationships work. Guys, I do. I don't just sort of know it. I completely, thoroughly, decades have lived in this space, know how it works, understand the value prop, the whole shebang. Let me just add Kris here.
Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Kris Patel, what's up, man?
Good, good.
I'm going to pause and actually give myself a break from talking. I'm hearing an echo. You hearing that?
Yeah, I think it's me. Give me one second. I'm just going to put on my headphones.
Okay. Amit, you're welcome to join as well. You let me know if you want to get on. Let's see. It's that awkward echo in the background. I know nobody said anything about my haircut when I got it. Kris gets an instant bonus on the haircut piece. But I'm going to ignore the background noise for a second and just say I think the key here is that as more and more data comes out and more of these points of aggregation are released around news, what they're working on, how they're doing things, I think it's an important takeaway to understand that we have to look at this as a piece of a vision, a piece of a puzzle. Private jets have great Wi-Fi. I'm sure you could join if you want to, but no worries. We can accept it for what it is. So, Kris, I'd love to get your take on this, both on the news and then both what you think from the reseller perspective, because you, in your role, work with resellers, implementers, integration folks. So I'd love to get your take on it, if you don't mind. And you were on mute too, just FYI you were.
There you go.
Here we go.
There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I mean, everyone works with third-party resellers with software. So I think I'll just address that at first. Anytime you're trying to work, especially when you're working in the government space, are companies that these organizations they trust, right? So they're pretty much all contracted via that organization to say, okay, listen, we need a solution. This is our problem. We don't know this company Palantir, but we do know you guys. So if you guys tell us, hey, this is a good company, this is what's gonna, provide the solution, then we'll back you, right? So basically they resell the product that's out there. Now that doesn't mean that that company is only going to push your product. They're going to tailor the solution based on the customer's needs. But if Palantir is one of those partners, they're going to be saying, okay, yeah, well, Palantir can do this. So let's get them involved, right? So the way that I would probably analogize this to so that everyone could understand, think of it this way. Palantir right now is starting to get to a point where they're not just going directly to consumers, but they're also developing channel partners. So imagine right now Palantir is a farmer selling apples. Is he going to do a really big job trying to sell apples individually from his farm? Or is he going to try to sell it to Kroger, and then Kroger takes a little bit of a cut and then sells his apples from Kroger? Same thing with Pathmark. Same thing with all these other grocery chains that are out there. So right now, Palantir, when it got IBM to partner with them, that became, hey, Walmart now carries Palantir. That would be the analogy that I would probably say when you're talking about third-party resellers. Now, specifically the one that was announced today is important because they are a government IT consulting provider, which means that usually the government doesn't just go to any third-party resellers. They go to specific ones that they have trusting relationships with, and this is one of them. And it's the same thing with some of the other companies that are out there that Palantir already has partnerships with, but this just adds to the broadness of what Palantir can actually reach and touch now, right? So that's kind of been one of the bottlenecks for Palantir, where they've tried to sell directly to the government and it hasn't worked out as well as they had hoped. So now they're also developing channel partners so that this way they can branch out and actually reach out into the ether and get more customers. They may take a little bit of a hit on the margins. So just remember, if you try to go directly to the government, win a contract, you're getting that full margin. But if you go through a reseller, you're going to have to give up a little bit of that margin, right? Because essentially they're going to take a cut from that. But more importantly, and this is what the thing is, if you're trying to grow, you can't limit yourself to being that guy that's standing in, at the farmer's market trying to sell your apples. You need to be in Kroger, right? Yep. You need to have a national presence. And people, like I said, people also want to go to Kroger to buy apples because every time they've gone to Kroger to buy apples before, it's been a good product. So they always kind of trust it,
And so what this sort of goes back to where we started as well is that is definitely the positive of having that partner. And sort of we explain this with the idea of you are the hands and the ears in those relationships, in the rooms. However, if Kroger puts your product on the bottom shelf, doesn't turn it over, lets it get old and stinky and no one buys it, those apples are going to be bad for your brand. So that's why you have to have strong channel management, strong channel managers to ensure you're enabling, you're training, you're keeping them up to date on new products, you have them doing all the right things. So it's very much a partnership in the true sense of the word, where Palantir has things to lose, but the partners don't. So they really got to double down on those efforts and make sure they're providing what they need to be successful as well. Got a really interesting question here. And then Kris, I want to jump in a bit more because I think this idea of IL6 and sort of my tie back to the way HIPAA was a few years ago of being both capable and available to do it, as well as having your own prep in place. But D, if I was working at Palantir, what position would I like to be in, and what would be my first objective? I would say if I was to pursue or take a job at Palantir, it would be probably like a VP of sales. More than likely would be what I would be applying for there. And I think honestly, the biggest challenge that I have understood to date is how they expand the conversation to be very C-suite focused, right? They're definitely tight with engineers and software development. They're very tight in the office of IT, but I haven't heard a lot of messaging in around COO, CRO offices. So I think sort of creating a bit more of like very, very clear cut business use cases, business value objectives. And I want to start to understand real numbers. What are the returns the average company that does X gets? What about in this sector or this industry? So really understanding from a vertical and from a sector integration perspective, when you win, what is the result of using this and how easy it is to replicate? So I'm going to make it to answer that really simple. Replication of process is a big key for me as a sales leader. Is you need to make sure that everyone on the team is on the same page and can push the same way. So you're always going in the same direction, not trying to solve for 25 variant problems at 25 different customers. Now that's fine to do that in the beginning, but to scale, you need to think about things in terms of like a product SKU that you can sell 100 times in a row and it's always the same. And shout out to CyberFam, my partner on the Dad Bod TV podcast. Another Fire Not Safe for Work one today. So we're going to eventually get it to not be 18 plus. But Kris, you know what?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Perfect.
No, I was going to say, for me, I'd love to be on the integration side. One of the things that I always feel that kind of like lacks a little bit with regards to Palantir is that the use cases are not necessarily being presented in a more simpler form. Like whenever I see these demo days and everything else, it's great. They talk about, like how they were able to do this and how they were able to do that, but they never really go into the minutia of it. And what happens is the end user, who are usually non-technical people that are going to be making decisions, that Palantir is supposedly the target audience. Because remember, the target audience, from my understanding, is decision makers. Most decision makers, they have management experience. They don't have technical experience. So they're usually trying to go from point A to point B with the lowest amount of friction possible. So when you have a developer conference or you have a conference and you're talking about how you can do these great things with the code repositories and everything, that doesn't necessarily raise like a flagpole in most of the C-suite to say, yeah, we definitely need to get this product. So I think one of the things that I would probably like try to do is try to simplify and break things down, and also at the same time be a little less secretive about what the end uses are. So I'll give you an example, and the reason why I became bullish on Palantir. And this is something that if you've been in the community long enough, you'll understand. It was, believe it or not, a Reddit post that someone put a really long time ago. And this Reddit post was about how Skywise actually affected how Palantir integration with Skywise affected them and how big of an impact it was. So essentially this person, spoke about how, Palantir, before Palantir, you'd have parts on an airplane that would go bad. And then, you would have literally the plane get there and now the plane has downtime and you have to fix it and you have to do everything else. Well, with Palantir integration, they were able to get that sensor data live on the plane. So by the time it landed, there was already a part waiting for that plane to be ready to go. It also helped to figure out at what point does this what is that thing called? Does this part go bad? So before it got to the level where it was going to start to have a point of failure, they were able to replace it. So you minimize downtime. So yeah. when I'm a CEO or a CFO, if I'm in that hat and I'm like, my entire business relies on uptime, which means that if I have a plane and it's literally sitting on the ground, that's money just leaving my door. Whether or not, I have people booked, it's literally just sitting there and it's costing me money. So my goal is to reduce down the amount of downtime. If you are able to prove to the customer on the other side that, hey, we will help you reduce your downtime and make it in a very easy, presentable way, every CFO, CEO would jump on it. So an example that I would say for me is in healthcare is CT machines. The lifeblood of a radiology department is in its equipment. Okay, regardless of people, if we don't have patients on the table getting scanned, that's just money going out the door for us, right? So right now, we're on one hand, we're always trying to figure out how to increase the number of patients, but also we're trying to figure out how to make sure that our machines are always running as much as we can, because every time we scan a patient, we get more money. Now, here's the thing: if I have a system that's going to tell me ahead of time, hey, this CT machine is going to have this issue after this period of time, be ready to not schedule someone on that date, because guess what? An engineer is going to have to come and replace some parts
Mhm.
preemptively, right? It could be very easy. It could be something that you can use downtime. You don't have anyone scheduled for 4 hours. You get the part replaced, you get it done. And guess what? The only interruption you had was that 4 hours. If you don't do something proactive, right? And you do what I like to call predictive maintenance, right? Or preventative maintenance, what you're going to run into is in the middle of the day, you have a full schedule of patients, right? The machine goes down. Now you have to call the vendor. The vendor has to have someone come in. It's going to take 24 to 48 hours turnaround for them to come. They're going to spend another 6 to 7 hours trying to diagnose it. If they need a replacement part, now that's going to be another couple of days, and they'll have to get it overnighted, right? So now your downtime went from predictively 4 hours to almost 3 days, right? And the amount of value that you just lost by not scanning patients that entire time is huge, and it's immense. So I would say that it's things like this that Palantir is really going to have to like be very specific with industries and say, you know what, this is the kind of stuff we can offer you. I do know that they are working with companies that need to have the least amount of downtime
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
An example is one of their partnerships with a trucking company that was like published, I think 6 months ago. I was going to do a video about it, but then I just kind of lost my train of thought on it, and I just skipped it. But I think I'm going to do it again. But that's the key that I want you to understand. And here's the other thing: these are the same concepts, believe it or not, that we use in the military. Because the last thing you want is an M6, if is a what do you call it, an F-22 running, and in the middle of a war, you find out, hey, there was a part on this F-22
Yeah.
that went bad 6 months ago, and now you have a grounded plane, right? One
Yeah.
of the things that you're going to have, especially in the military, is that we always calculate our uptime to make sure that all of our equipment is good. The last thing you want is to go to war with equipment that doesn't work. That's what happened to the Russians, and we're not in the habit of doing things like the Russians right now. So I would say if Palantir was able, and they should do that, they should be able to communicate that more and hopefully get their message out.
I think it's important too for folks to understand that the key here is not the functional ability to do these things. It's the ability to then also sell them, right? That's always a big challenge for a lot of companies. Is it's easy to have the best of breed of anything, but you got to find a way to make sure they're selling them. And I think the easiest way for anyone who's new to the way these things kind of work is this is why we look at a lot of things like scoring, right? But I want to talk about this idea of attribute level scoring in a second. But there's some good questions in here. What I'll simply say is this: like, although the use cases may be extremely broad, the idea isn't to necessarily pin them down to specifics, but more like bucket them out, right? I want to verticalize and then create sectors and verticals, then have programs for sales, for service, for success, for IT, for operations, for HR. And that's the way to think about it. And one thing is a cool point out, Kris, and I always love when you bring up the military piece, especially you coming from the military, is always so great to have your opinion on it. Their entire approach to starting this was, how do we ensure we save lives? Like, I mean, that's the thesis for a lot of what this data was used for, was keeping soldiers safe on the front line. So that is the most critical of mission critical. So everything's built off this idea of ensuring you know exactly what the risk is and executing on it. Bringing this down to like a really baseline level for those who aren't familiar with data science, when we talk about things like we call it PMQ, predictive maintenance quality, right? To recognize things before they happen. We can do this with IoT, edge-based, but it's data. What we want to do is go out and look at, and this is just for anyone who's not used to this, what we want to do is go out there and look at it like this. We know that things break down when these things happen. We know that they don't break down when these things happen, right? It could be how often we put oil in a doorway that opens and closes 100 times a day. It could be a bolt that snaps 25% of the time more often than the arm that holds the bolt, right? So when we understand, like, here are the factors of when things break, here are the factors of when things don't break, and in between that is a spectrum. When we go out and look at all the things in this case for like predictive maintenance as an example, of all the things that could potentially break, where do they fall in a risk from 0 to 100? Delivering that information on the back end is heavy, heavy data, prescriptive, predictive, narrative analytics to tell me what could go wrong. Here's what will happen if it does. Then how do we mitigate it? What I want on the front lines is to deliver something that will be really easy to understand narratively. And I think that's what we're working towards here on a data perspective. And I think that's where the big challenge is for a lot of folks is understanding, well, okay, I get it. It's complex technology. What good does it do for my business? Well, think about it from a business perspective. What if you can identify, just as an example, and they're not the only ones who can do this, to be fair here, everybody. What if I can recognize 6 months before a customer churns that they're at risk of churning because something has changed in the way they use the product, and 1,000 other customers had that same change and they got rid of the product, right? This is when you start to see big changes in your business, shifts in process, the way you hire, the way you move data, the way you react to things. And then you can build programs. Those programs could be, from A to Z, anything you can imagine. But the goal with this data is it's about operationalizing data. That is the key that often gets missed here because we talk about it so often in the terms of being a stock or a company. This is the goal of anyone. Take the name Palantir off the table for a second. If you work in big data, data science, data modeling, analytics, business intelligence, your goal is to visualize and operationalize data. The winners in this space over the next decade plus, are going to be those that can do it the fastest, the easiest, with the widest web to be able to touch anything, no matter what it looks like and where it is, bring it together and make sense of it, and then deploy it. This goes full circle back to why resellers that don't get properly trained and don't distribute properly are going to be terrible for your business, and those that do it, understand it, and work really well with it could be huge for the business. Kris, I would just tie it back to you and your thoughts there. Like, you're dealing with this every day. And one thing I want to call out, sorry, I meant to say this right after your point, was there are a lot of things that we don't think about if you're a consumer that you can never get back for a business. So that whole day of missed technology means rescheduling all those appointments, which means taking up slots on another day. Every time a plane is grounded, you already are running planes thousands of times a day. There is no extra spot available. That is lost revenue forever. You don't make that revenue up in certain industries. And that's why it's really important that we focus on those kind of things. So Kris, I'd kick it over to you for your thoughts there as well.
Yeah. And there's that dollar amount that literally gets kind of thrown into the garbage when you have a system like that, right? Where if something gets faulted, that all that money that you lost is literally just going right into the trash, right? So that's a huge thing. So now here's the problem though. How do you sell that to a customer? To say, hey, listen, last year, how much money did you lose on missed flights? Well, guess what? For a certain amount of money, we can reduce that, right? Or, hey, how many patients were you not able to do because your machines were down? That is a cost, right? How much of that can we bring back to you? A lot of that data is, once again, siloed because you really don't really know what's going to happen. Because a lot of that stuff is like, it's very, what I like to call fungible, right? It could be something really high. It could be something really low. If it's something that, like every company's not tracking the data that they need to in the way that they should be. So that's a huge problem. The other thing that I kind of want to mention here is from a financial point of view, there are a lot of untapped dollars in organizations that are pre-allocated out to people and to services and everything else. That's money that's literally sitting in an operational bucket that sometimes you don't even know that's sitting out there. And instead of actually using it, you're literally just trying to scramble around. So I'll give you an example of a use case that the Army used from a finance perspective. So I know a lot of people are going to say, well, what does finance and the military really have to do with each other? Don't they defend the country? Well, guess what? The Army has an operational budget. So they need to allocate money and resources to pay people, to buy equipment, to service equipment and everything else. So the way that when an organization does their budgeting, what they do is they try to figure out, hey, how much money am I going to need for the rest of the year to accomplish this mission? Now, let's say I have $1 billion set up to service tanks, right? Like my goal is to service my tanks. Every time a tank goes down, I have to spend this much money with the vendor in order to service that tank. So that money is just sitting in a bucket, right? Now, here's the thing. After 6 months, you find out that, hey, you're actually not going to need $1 billion. You're only going to need $500 million for the rest of the year. And right now you have an extra $200 million sitting there. Yeah. why not take that extra 200 million and put it somewhere where it's actually needed instead of trying to figure out how to get more money out of the government, right?
This is an
So
amazing comment. I'll let you finish your thoughts, and I want to talk about this because
yeah.
that's a really good comment.
And that's the key, that when you look at it from an army perspective, where, believe it or not, the cost doesn't matter nearly as much, but on the organizational level, where you have a private company who have operating budgets, if they have a limited amount of budgets, based on that budget, they're able to either expand or stay the same or not spend money. So what happens is, if there's ways that you can find cost reductions and cost savings where you're not going to need money in the future and you can use that money forward, that's big. Also, not having to have all that money sit in a bucket piled up means that you're actually able to do more with what you have right now. So in terms of investing decisions and everything else, it can speed up the time that's required to make an investment decision. So let's say right now I'm a CEO of a company and I want to expand and build another factory. Well, I have an operating budget and I need to put a deposit down with a builder and vendor in order to make this factory. Now, here's the thing. If it's not money that I have to wait until I have enough money so that I can tell them to get started on the construction, and they may be 6 months in the future. Well, guess what? What if I could pull the money from unused sources and at the same time justify that I'm not going to need money in this area because I thought it was going to cost me $100 million to do this project and it's only going to cost me 50? Well, I can use that other 50 to reallocate it to this project, get that deposit down, and make a decision that I would have had to wait a year from now, and instead make that decision now and hit it and start moving with it. So I think those are so many use cases for this, and it all resides in data. And the one thing I love about data is that data is unlimited. Like it's just growing every day. The question is, how do we use it? And it's going to take a lot of creative thinkers on the product side to get it. Now, here's where Palantir's biggest value proposition is. Software is magic. Okay? It's literally magic. It's a superpower. It's magic. But if you don't have a use case for it, if I ask you right now, Sean, if I could give you a superpower, what superpower would you have? Well, essentially, I'm just asking you a question, and you got to think about it and everything else. But if you think of software, that's the exact same thing. Where if it's almost like asking, what kind of superpowers do you want? And Palantir, believe it or not, can give you the most broad superpowers that you can have. Like if superpowers was a thing, some companies can make you super fast. Like what's his name? I'm like blanking right now. Or some can give you the ability to fly. Yep. Guess what Palantir can do? Palantir can make you into Superman, essentially, in the software world, in the data world. Sorry, I just ranted.
No, you didn't rant, but it's a great call out. And I think this though speaks also for those who don't work in sort of the sales world of enterprise analytics. What you pointed out here, Kris, is a really big problem. Number one, there exists this world of finance around procurement where if you don't spend it, you lose it. So it's very important when you own budgets. It's very important for these people who own budgets, because if you're given 500 million as a budget and you only spend 400 next year, you're only going to get 400. So there's an incentive to ensure you're using it. The other big piece of this as well, I'm not imagining people don't think this already, but just to give everyone who's watching an idea, the reason it takes so long to close on this is because you have to do so much work. They don't just look at it and say, you know what, I do have a lot of data. This solves that problem. I'm going to buy it. You have to deliver business value assessments. You have to understand process at scale. Forget about the technical fits here for a second, right? That's a whole nother ball game of ensuring it will work, it will deliver, it will connect to the sources and work within your data sets, be able to pull it all together and deliver something usable. From purely the business side, you're talking total cost of ownerships, return on investments, time cost of ownership, when the returns will come in. You have what-if analysis built into this at scale. It takes a long time to not only validate it will work, but then it will deliver the value. And I think the key with your superhero question, if Marcus understands it, right? Getting a superpower, you have to know which superpower you actually want and can use. The reason I love this question is it speaks to the point of the right answer is, well, what's the problem I'm facing, right? I don't want to, if my superhero if my need is strength, but there's nothing heavy to lift, maybe I wasted my time. Or like, hey, do I really need to fly? What if I could go fast? Well, why do I need to go fast if I can do something else? Like, it's so dependent. And this is the same way it is when you position advanced analytics, especially in data mining and modeling, to companies is, yeah, it's great. It's definitely fast. It can do these things, but it's also $20 million maybe. What if I could buy another solution that's 10% as good, but 100th of the price? Or what if I just hire a data scientist who works 10 hours a day to do this work, and I give them overtime and I get what I want anyways? So there's so many considerations here in terms of not only the ability to solve for a problem, but then from a cost perspective and an ongoing cost perspective, is it the right solution as well? That superhero point is so great because everything starts with solving the problem. And Palantir's SAM and TAM is going to be customers who need to have, we just built a dashboard. Shibari, it's a story of my life. I don't want to talk about that.
Dude, I cannot tell you the amount of people that just build dashboards at my organization, and people are like, wow, this is going to revolutionize everything. And I'm like, dude, it's a dashboard. And half the time it's just done on on Excel via VBA, and people are like, and then I'm trying to explain to them like, no, this within 6 months, no one is even going to use this data because all the inputs on there are complete garbage. Like you need a more fluid thing. So yeah, I agree, Shibari. Let's just build a dashboard. And literally everyone is an expert at building dashboards now. Everyone does that.
So here's the problem too, right? If you don't work in this space and you don't see it every day, most companies out there, whether they know it or not, they're driving their car with cardboard over their windshield because all you're looking at on a dashboard is the past, right? I can see what happened. I can see where it happened. I can figure out how it happened. I can analyze every detail of it. But if you're not forecasting, projecting, predicting, prescribing forward, you're missing the biggest part of your business. And I want to call this out too, Jarek. I think this is one of the big issues in the industry right now as well, is from the standpoint of hiring the right people. I think you're right. The traditional salesperson that a lot of folks are used to seeing, the TV version of a salesperson, is the 500 cold calls a day, pounding customers, working their way in. In this space to be successful, it's about knowing that you're going to have 4, maybe 5 accounts, Fortune 50, Fortune 100. And your goal is to be the consultant who understands. And again, I can speak from experience. Your goal is to essentially be their partner and consultant even before they know you. So when you get on a phone call with someone to describe what you're going to do for them, it's not just about asking questions. It's about coming with a very deep, valuable point of view of their sector, their business, their go-to-market, their potential challenges, how it can be applied to them. I read every page of every 10K of every customer I work with. I know their numbers a lot of times better than they know them. And I'll bring those numbers in with me to understand where there's challenges, where I think there's opportunities. This also helps myself in my job, and then hopefully their reps for their jobs to understand the value they're bringing. So when I come to you and I say, Jarek, for example, your customer acquisition cost is here. I believe by taking a different approach, because no one in the industry is doing it this way, you could deliver on this. You're starting to build the ability for them to afford to buy this because you're showing how they're going to get the money for it by saving in other places and then generating more on the back end as well. One question, Kris, this is funny because you and I talked about this for quite a bit the other day, so I'm going to put it up on the screen. Kris and I had a really great conversation about sort of how we think about analyzing companies. No real details to share, just a really good one-to-one conversation. And I think that there's a couple of really big challenges with Palantir's price rising in a quick way, which is why I like to think in terms of 5 years, 10 years, whatever, a long-term play. Kris, I think you do a great job of explaining the problem with the amount of shares outstanding and why that is so tough on the price going up. But one thing I want to call out is you have to think about, for this specific question, and it's a really fair question, and it makes a ton of sense from an analysis perspective. For it to get to 200 or 300, you have to assume now it's going to have to see the market cap also multiply by that much as well. So the question we have to start to ask ourselves is, at what point, from an earnings perspective, do we think Palantir, or any company for that matter, any company, is going to be at a point where they're worth $500 billion, $750 billion, $1 trillion plus? And that number on the screen has to back into that number by either dividing the market cap by that, and then you rather by the shares, and then that's what you have for a theoretical per share price. But it's based on a lot of ratios, a lot of values, a lot of back end on the numbers. But Kris, your take on this is really great as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I'm probably going to get a lot of Palantir hate for this, but I'm going to be honest because you have to be honest. There is still a lot of execution risk that is involved with Palantir getting to $1 trillion. Just because you have a great product does not necessarily make you 100% guaranteed to get to that $1 trillion mark. I know a lot of us want Palantir to get to $1 trillion tomorrow morning, but trust me, it takes a really long time. You have to have a lot of confidence. You have to have a lot of stuff go right in order to get there. That's why it's really hard to get there. At $200 a share, right now with the amount of shares they have outstanding, plus the amount of RSUs that they grant, because their compensation structure is based on issuing RSUs, it's going to increase, right? In the future, I don't see a point unless they become super cash flow positive, which they are cash flow positive right now, and they're going way beyond, that they're able to justify doing what is that thing called? Share repurchases. Because if you do share repurchases and lower the amount of shares outstanding, that can help you push into the future. But they're nowhere near that. They're not at the level of Apple. They're not the level of Google. They're not even at the level of some of these other companies in the energy sector where they can buy back shares to get you to a higher multiple, a higher price right now. So number one, they have a ton of outstanding shares. So when you have a lot of outstanding shares, you also have a lot of friction for the stock going higher in a very quick fashion. There are times where things go straight meme, where literally there's just so much demand out there from people that they buy it that the price gets pushed higher. But this typically doesn't happen. And I was able to actually make a good amount of money last year when this happened to Nokia. Nokia almost has like $4 billion of shares outstanding, and they were trading at like $4. And all these people were like hammering Nokia, and I was actually able to sell like literally 60-day call contracts at $10 a share for almost like $1 something. And it was like unheard of. I was like, you're talking about a 25% return within 2 weeks on a company who's got $4 billion shares on the market right now. So it was crazy. And it's this very similar thing that we all have to understand, that total number of outstanding shares is huge. The only time where companies start to go really parabolic with their share price is when that outstanding number is either fixed or it's diminishing, or their run rate in terms of revenue and net income is just wildly profitable. And there's another good question on there. Why aren't investment firms not buying Palantir en masse? The reason why is very simple, in my opinion. There are better value propositions out there with less risk. Why would I not buy Google, and why would I buy Palantir? Especially when Google is still growing at 30% a year, is profitable, buying back shares, net income positive, and there's no end in sight to when they're going to stop growing like that. Whereas Palantir hasn't proven yet over a consistent period of time that they're going to be able to generate that 30%. Yes, they have said that over the next 5 years or 4 years that they're going to be growing at 30%. That's great. And I really love the company for putting that out there, because it does give you a sense of being able to project. But guess what? Do you know who has done it already in the last 5 years? Google. Google has grown. So for them, they're looking at it from another perspective, saying, hey, I see more value at safer prices for Google than I do for Palantir. The only people that are going to really go with Palantir right now are people that understand that, hey, I think this company can grow even beyond that 30%. I see an addressable market that's even above that. So I think what's going to happen is right now Palantir is going to have to execute. If they don't execute, then guess what? These big guys will never show up. They'll never come in. It's all about execution right now. The execution risk is probably really, really high for Palantir. And a lot of companies outside of the retail investing section, they realize that. And that was the same exact problem, and the reason why all these big companies didn't invest in Tesla when Tesla was starting to grow. Because it's not that they didn't believe in the product or the company or anything else. They just didn't believe that there was there was too much execution risk for them to get Tesla to $1 trillion, right? That was their thinking, right? I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm not saying it was right. I'm just saying that is the level of thinking that a lot of these fund managers have. They're all about risk. Half of portfolio management is not about gains. It's about managing risk, And so from a risk perspective, Tesla did not look like it was worth the risk at the time. They were wrong. because if anyone who's out there right now, they were wrong, right? So go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
Just a really, really simple reason too, as well, though, um, is they also have to manage volatility of the holdings, these big funds, because investors want returns, but even more than that, they don't want downside. So this isn't a reason to be bearish necessarily or bullish necessarily. It's just depending on the fund, where they invest and how they invest will determine the level of ratio between up and down within the portfolio they can have. And if there's a company like a Palantir that might drop by quite a bit or go up by quite a bit, sometimes it just doesn't fit. That's the perspective of it. But Clifford, I'm also going to call. I saw your second part of your question. So earlier in this video, we also talked a bit about sort of the total addressable market and their serviceable addressable market. The real goal for a company like these folks right now is not to go after everybody. It's to go after the key biggest players in the market who have major structural billion-dollar problems. And what I would also call out on the lower end, the hedge funds, the institutions, the Wall Streeters, they have a lot of proprietary focused technology to do this work with big teams of developers and data scientists who are going to code it and customize it for their own specific needs. And a lot of it is proprietary, so they wouldn't want to share it here anyways. Just keep that in mind. It's not an endorsement, nor is it a problem. It's just sometimes there's things to consider as well. There's so many good comments here. I'm sort of like trying to figure out which ones to hit on. Steve, where they spend their money. Yeah, so you know what? I think one thing to remember is they've been around for a long time, but they're still earlier in their growth. They're brand new to the commercial markets. So I think the way you guys have to think about this, when I moved into a leadership role in my previous time at IBM, one of the big things we were looking at was like when we're moving away from our Fortune 500, then the 1,000, then verticalization, then specialization in sectors. Then you move into lower enterprise. Then you move into commercial markets. That's what we call typically mid-market. After mid-market, you typically will have what's called your small and medium businesses. These are your 1 to 50 type companies, right? So with every bit of investment, you're expanding your TAM, but also your SAM as well. So it's not just who I can go after, what my solution solves for, but who can I realistically target. That comes with expansion of those markets, both from verticals and sizing. The products have to be adjusted to fit those markets as well. And then they're going to have to further expand the partnerships within the ecosystem to service those customers. So that, to me, is where I both want to see and am seeing them do that. I think in the most recent report, we saw that with commercial customers. That's a big focus in the place they're growing as well. Kris, I don't know if you'd share any thoughts on that either.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I think they're going to have a problem in the next couple of years that I don't know if a lot of people have thought of, and it's not a problem that's bad. It's a good problem, but at the same time, it can also be a bad problem, and that problem is what to do with cash, because that's what businesses tend to have to deal with. If you're a profitable business, you're generating cash, right? Yep. Eventually, you have to figure out what to do with it. Right now, Palantir has 2.5 billion sitting in cash right now. What is it doing? Well, last year they thought, well, why not just do some SPACs? Let's buy some interest in some SPACs. Let's go into the SPAC route. So that we'll see in the future how that pans out, right? Right now they're generating almost 400 billion in cash flow right now, free cash flow.
Yeah, that's wild.
Now that's great. Trust me, that's a problem every company wants to have. That's not a problem that you don't. But at the same time, you're gonna have to figure out what to do. Do you reinvest it back in your company? Do you reinvest it back into certain parts of your company in order to grow the business? Right now, they've set themselves up for a pretty ambitious goal of getting to a certain point in the next 4.5, 5 years. So in order to hit that goal and that, they're gonna have to spend money on sales and marketing. There's no getting around it. If your product is not, if you're not selling and you're not marketing your product and you don't get the total outreach that you need, you'll never hit that revenue target, right? So right now the goal is to invest in its own people, but it's not investing in the technology part of its people, but it's on the sales side. And I'm glad they're doing it, because if they want to hit that 30% target, they're going to need a lot more people focused in sales that are in marketing. They're going to be able to get them there. So I think that's one area.
Yep.
The other area that I think that they're gonna have to do, in my opinion, is what Salesforce did, and that is invest in early VC. So through Salesforce Ventures, it's something that just I think kind of lines up with what they're trying to do, which is invest small in a broad amount of companies so that one day if they become titans of industry, you are entrenched in their product lifecycle. So you are entrenched in their operating system. So an example is, let's say there's a company out there. It's a small company. It does very limited things right now, but they have big ambitions. Well, guess what? Maybe you throw them a couple of $1 million and also give them access to Foundry, which is what Foundry for Builders is doing, right? You give them some technical know-how, you give them some technical support via the people that you have on the ground, you give them that support and let them grow. And if they grow up to be a huge monster, one, you get the benefit of them being on the equity side where you get that exponential equity return, but
Right.
also you get a fundamental customer that's going to speak highly about your product. So I know that I'm not going to go too much into it, but if anyone is curious, go to Salesforce Ventures and look at the companies that Salesforce Ventures has nurtured and brought into fruition and why it's important, because these companies are huge now, like huge companies. I'm not going to say which ones, but they're huge.
You got to do the research there. And Kris, I actually have to go and get my kids to their sports for this evening. This was an awesome call. What I would ask to the folks who are listening in or in the chat, the questions are amazing. What I would really encourage you guys to think about is if this is something that's valuable and you have more questions you want answered, Kris, I'm sure you're open to it. I'd love to do more of these, really just some sort of like Q&A on this tech front mixed with a little bit of sales front. We'd love to do it more often. I really appreciate everyone being there. And what I'm going to also do is, Kris, I'm going to throw your channel and all your tags in the description once I get back from dropping them off. So, definitely worth the follow to have all of us on there. I think we all cover this in unique ways. What I want to call out, though, specifically, one thing that Kris and I have talked about quite a bit, both today and in previous shows, is this isn't just about pitching the 100% bull case. There are challenges. There are hurdles. There are things they need to execute on to be successful. I think that it sounds like they're working on that and getting there. And the question becomes, assuming execution, when and how long till we see the results from it? I think we're learning more and more every day. And then shout out as well, I don't know if Amit's still watching, but if you haven't seen Palantir Daily, he does aggregate this information on his site. It's a great place to check it out and really get the updates if you're looking for specific news articles all in one place too. So I'll throw it out there as well. So, hey, with that, Kris, thanks so much for jumping on. I really appreciate your insight. And everybody who watched and commented, really, really appreciate you guys. Cannot believe how much support we have here. Thanks so much for being part of a great community. Thanks, everybody. And with that,
Take care,
I'm going to take my daughter to ballet. So we'll see you later. Bye, everybody.
Enjoy.